for this busy Covent Garden scene, I'm just going to section out a few of the figures and show you how you can just imply these figures and the busyness of light and colour and tone. I've got a cerulean blue here to offset the reds that filter through. Okay, so let's dive in. Like I say, figures can be really, really scary. So you want to handle them in a lot more simplified forms. So I've got some crimson and some processed magenta, and I'm just going to start blocking in shapes. Okay, there we go. Again, plenty of colour on the brush, and we're just going to really go around the canvas and indicate these forms in the most simplistic way I can. Now I'm trying to make sure the colours link in. Within the reds I've been using, I'm going to use some burnt sienna, and this is really to imply the backs of the chairs. And again, I don't want to describe it too clearly, and I'm just going to do a few marks to indicate the heads and hands. Got some orange that I'm going to use again to vary colours as I go. I can now just use a little bit of cadmium yellow with a bit of red in it. Now there's a couple of points about highlights. Now I'm going to lay down a fair bit of yellow. Now the reason for this is when it comes to laying the whites, if they're sitting on top of a yellow, it just produces much more potent and colourful highlights. Okay, even for the tops of tables, to start with, it can just be a blob of vibrant yellow. You get too bogged down, you'll soon get fed up of looking at the scene time and time again. So really enjoy the process of applying paint. This guy's got a dark top on, so I'm going to leave that for now because I'm going to use some cooler colours to describe what's happening with this figure. And where the sun's streaming through, creating some lovely long shadows, I can just lay in some strong yellow. So we'll just finish off with a couple of strong highlights coming through. Okay, I'm using the same size brush, a 1-inch brush, but I'm going to start using some cooler colours. So I'm going to use processed cyan, viridian green, and this lovely violet colour. Don't overmix it too much because as I streak the colour down, you'll see all those colours filter through and create some really interesting shots of colour. And for the shadows, I might use a little bit of cerulean blue just to soften down. Really, if you're just trying acrylics out for the first time, try all kinds of different styles, try watered down paint, just for some watercolour effects, and then use them fairly thick and see the variety you can get with this paint because it's incredible. Very assertive amounts of colour. Again, if you're a little bit scared about using this much colour, maybe just try using 1 or 2 shades, just so you get used to colour mixing a little bit more. You will find that acrylic dries fairly quick, so you can buy all kinds of enhancers to slow down the drying time or go thicker with the paint. Bit of softer shadow, so a little bit more cerulean blue in with some processed cyan, and lighten up some of these areas and around there. So easy to get bogged down with areas that aren't necessarily important. Just let them fade into the distance. That way you'll have a lovely dominant focal point that's easy on the eye. Just stand back, take on board what you're doing, judge it in its entirety. A few little marks here and there. That is going to be pretty much it for the first stage. I'll let the paint settle down and then I'll come back with more definition and more detail. Okay, so I've let the initial layer dry off a bit. I've also gone down a brush size. It's a 3/4 inch brush. Loads of white, a little bit of lemon yellow, and I'm going to introduce a little bit of cerulean blue really so it's not overly bright, and I've got an option later on if I need to just soften out the highlights. Okay, we'll start in this area and work our way around. Again, this could be in fairly thick, luscious amounts of paint, strong white, and I'll start to just define areas of detail. I'm looking for variety rather than the same repetitive colours breaking through. So just introduce a little bit of cadmium yellow into the mix, just using little flecks of white to show the edge of some of these figures. So I can literally do a couple of fine shots of highlight and all of a sudden you get shoulders and part of the arm. So I'll go over all of these areas, just picking bits out as I go. Like I say, you retain so much control and you get to pick and choose areas that you think are more important. And especially when you're working in this style, like I say, there's varying techniques you can use with acrylics, more so than in any other medium. And you kind of pick and choose which one works for you. If you work in a very laborious way with fine brushes, it's such a temptation to start over brushing paint, over fiddling. So again, large brushes are the key really in not overdoing detail in a laborious way. And I'm quite keen to leave some fleck of vibrant colour. Again, it gives the impression that the sun's really beating down on these tables and on these figures. There's so many slats to these chairs. Again, if you're too literal about it, you'll end up drawing lots and lots of fine lines. This is where you get smaller pockets of light, just breaking through here and there. And the good thing about that, you then get a variety of larger shots of highlights against smaller ones. Okay, I'm just going to lighten, there's a temptation just to leave the blue, but just going to lighten that so there's another variety of colour. It should be all about the atmosphere of the place rather than detail and definition. Just because this guy's slightly taller, so the highlight's going to be raised. And if I then go back to a couple of dark colours again, just to give him a little bit more shoulder there, and he's wearing a cap. And again, this is where you fine tune all the various elements. And again, probably a good idea to allow some of this paint to settle down for the last few finishing touches where I can incorporate some really, really strong defining lines to bring out the focal points a little bit more. Okay, so this final stage is really about bringing out the definition and just tidying up really some of the marks and some of the features. So a 1/4 inch brush with some orange and some yellow. All I'm going to do is just rectify some of the marks and features just so there's a little bit more clarity. Again, I'm being quite assertive about the quantity of paint I'm using, and I'm just literally just laying some smaller brush strokes to bring out various features in this scene. And as I go, I'm just mixing other colours in just to really vary a few strokes here and there. So in my combination of orange and yellow, I'm just introducing purple, which can dominate those two colours, and it starts to send the shade into something that's a little bit more earthy. So while I'm on the darks again, I'll just add a bit more blue. That will give me a slightly more intense dark, and I can just build up a bit more strength in a few areas. Where you get the table legs and the chairs, you could just do with a few fine lines. The purple's playing a bigger part at this point because it's the strongest shade that I'm using. Again, stepping back is always a good idea. You will find if you work sitting down at a desk, there's a temptation where you rest the arm against the tabletop. But if you work on a table easel or a freestanding easel, your arm's freer to lay in much more interesting and vigorous line work. Okay, again, slightly smaller brush with white and lemon yellow. And again, going back to a few areas just to sharpen up edges as I go. Just a few more warmer shades in the foreground where there's a couple of figures. And just a couple of finishing touches here and there. Again, these are quite important to really make sense of the expressive marks that you started with. And also, maybe you could vary some of the colours that you started with and use some burnt sienna with some green, and all of a sudden you get a different shade to what you had previously. And there we have it. Just a nice, quick and easy impression of a bustling scene, which, like I say, could take hours, but with expressive brush strokes and just the right bit of definition can create this hive of activity. That brings us to the end of this DVD. I hope you've enjoyed watching it, and I've inspired you to pick up a brush and start painting with Daler-Rowney System 3 acrylics. Thanks for watching and happy painting.